Okay, so the topic of this talk is the three essentials of good judgment, or as I like to call it, what's going on, what should I do, and do I have to? So, just a little background on this. How much background? A little background. I broke a glider once. Did some serious damage to a wing, and really wanted to analyze. It was either, get out of the sport. If this was going to be a random occurrence that I had no control over, I'm not going to do it. If I could figure out how I got into that situation, what my process was that was flawed, then I would keep flying. So that was part of it. Also, I was teaching a kids program in Hollister. I was just starting to do that. And if you're teaching 14, 16, 18-year-olds, they have no built-in sense of judgment for the most part. And so you need to have...
Find the next name on the
Who's
list.
next?
Who's next?
Hi, Brett.
Brett.
And I've already signed up, so the next person is Dan.
So I needed a vocabulary and a framework for talking to these kids about judgment. And I find it also works well for adults. So that's the idea, is just to have a framework for discussing it and to be able to increase awareness just by having that framework. Okay, so in my view, the three essentials of good judgment are situational awareness, knowing what's going on, decision making, and that's not necessarily decision making in real time. That can be, most of it should be done before you ever leave the ground. And then self-discipline, which I think is probably the one that we're worst at. Not being able to follow through on the decisions that we have made. So I'm going to go through each of these areas and talk about them. So situational awareness is basically the ability to perceive what's going on, to have the knowledge to correctly interpret what you're seeing means, and then to be able to predict how that's going to affect you. So that's the basics of situational awareness. So an example would be this would be if I see that cloud. Well, it's a pretty cloud. There should probably be lift under it, And if that's all I get out of that, I may be in trouble. Because if I know that I've looked at the soundings and I know about the stability of the atmosphere, and I know if a cloud's going up with that much vertical development, and I have that kind of sounding, then I can probably predict that I'm going to have a pretty nasty thunderstorm. So being able to go through those steps by perceiving it, having the knowledge to interpret it, and then knowing what it means to you in the future is important. So if on a day where you have clouds like that popping up everywhere where you took off from, you probably don't want to fly 300 miles away and then try to come back, because you're probably going to come back to complete overdevelopment, lightning, thunder, winds, stuff. So one of the most important things for good situational awareness is, ignorance is good for situational awareness. No. One of the big obstacles to situational awareness is ignorance. If you don't know what stuff means, then ignorance is bliss, right? You won't be worried about anything, but you probably won't be around long. So you really gotta, that's why, everybody's here to learn stuff. This is a great thing. Listening to the talks yesterday in the evening with Gordon and I always can't pronounce his name, Einer, whatever it is. Einer. Listening to some of the problems that they've encountered that you just wouldn't think of. It's one of the great things about going to a group like this, going to a thing like this. If you're fixated or distracted, then your situational awareness can really go down. Let's say your routine gets messed up, there's a delay, you start talking, and you get distracted from your checklist. So that's a perfect example of a fixation or distraction. Fixation, like Tim was talking about, if you really want to get that badge, and you're so fixated on that one goal that you're ignoring stuff, that can be bad. If something goes wrong, this is your classic canopy coming open on toe, bee flying around the cockpit, you've got to stay focused on what's important. If you get overloaded, if there's too much going on at once, then that can really kill your situational awareness. In a situation where, say, on your first cross countries, you're getting further and further away from your home airport, you don't have it in glide anymore, you're not sure exactly how high you are, or how high you are with respect to the airports that are close, you don't know if you have them in glide distance or not. So you're having to worry about that. And then you're also worrying about thermaling and trying to stay up. Your situational awareness is going to go down. You're probably going to not clear for traffic as much as you should. You're probably not going to fly very well. You're probably not going to be very coordinated. So overload is something that can really sneak up on you. Now, of course, let's say you get low and you have to land out somewhere. A lot of new experiences, easy to get overloaded. One of the best ways to deal with overload, of course, is to be proficient, be in good practice. Okay, complacency. That'll never happen to me, so I'm not going to talk about it. Now, the complacency, if you've done something so many times that, and something changes, and something changes, then you may not notice it because you're just, you've always done it this way.
Russel?
Who was the last?
Oh, sorry.
Fred had it?
Well, it went beyond me, but.
Oh, did it? Okay. Always gone over to the ridges on the west, and always been able to fly over the top, and never been any problem. But someday, if you haven't paid attention and if there's a wind from a different direction, it can bite you. So you just gotta be, again, you might have flown here in thermal conditions. Yeah, you've come to fly here, you've got a wave condition. If you're complacent, you don't take into account that change, be aware of that change, it can bite you. Okay, if you're fatigued or stressed, say you've had a long flight, and at the end of that flight is when the most important stuff, happens, a good landing. And that's one of the most challenging things. So you need to make sure that even after you've flown that long amount of time, that you're in shape and you're able to, you shouldn't just go from, I've done an hour flight, now I'm going to go do an 8-hour flight. Because by the time that 8 hours, by the time that 8 hours, is over, your situational awareness level may be in the dirt. So work up to these challenging things gradually. Okay, so things that could be red flags of decreasing situational awareness. If you, assuming you're a good pilot to start with, but all of a sudden you're just behind the glider, you just don't seem to, you're having trouble keeping the pitch or keeping the yaw correct because you're doing so many other things, well then obviously you need to focus on flying the glider and then divvy up your bandwidth to the other things as necessary. If you're so overloaded that you're getting confused, that's not good. It can lead to difficulty making decisions, again showing that your situational awareness isn't what it should be. And if you just feel rushed or overwhelmed. So when these things happen, hopefully you can catch them early, and then whatever situation is causing them, try to minimize it. And it may be something that, at the end of the flight, you're feeling this way, so the next time you do a flight, you need to do some things that help get rid of this. And we'll talk about that right now. So some things that you can do to improve your situational awareness. The more knowledge you have about a situation, the better, the more aware you're going to be. If you're proficient, so that you've flown the glider so much that you don't have to think about it, it doesn't take any bandwidth. So that will help you be able to concentrate on the other things. The flying the glider will take care of itself. Planning. If you get down low somewhere and you have done no planning to know what altitude do I actually need from here to get to an airport, then you've got to figure that out in the moment. So that's going to take up a lot of your processing power right there. So if you do planning in advance, you just say, oh, I'm right here, I need 5,000 feet, I got that, no problem, go on with flying. So you just shift gears right back to where they need to be. And then like I said earlier, prioritize and simplify. The most important thing is to fly the glider, not stall, not spin, that kind of thing. So that has to be at the top. And the most important, fly within your limits. Don't push, don't blow past your limits. When you're trying to stretch your limits a little bit, do it slowly. Okay, now I'm going to talk about decision making. And I have this silly little model here I'm going to use. Bear with me. So I'm trying to weigh out the benefit versus the consequence. I really want to do this activity, but what could go wrong? So the hazard is what could go wrong, and the consequence is the result of it going wrong. So I'm defining some terms here. Now, risk you can think of as how likely you are to encounter that hazard that will lead to that consequence. So, if something's very risky, even though the consequence may be low, we might not want to do it. If the risk is very low, but the consequence is really high, then we may not want to do it. So that's that balance between risk and consequence that we are working with. So a thing that has really small risk of happening, but has the consequence of being deadly, we've got to be really paying a lot of attention to. Okay, so anything I can do to reduce the risk, I'm moving that weight to the left a little bit. I'm calling that prevention. So prevention is things that I can do that decrease the chance of actually encountering the hazard that leads to the consequence. So that would be things like, if I want to go do aerobatics, I want to go learn how to do a roll on the glider. Well, I could just go up and do a roll and see how it works out. Okay? The risk in that case would be pretty high. Consequences could be pretty serious. The hazard would be that I tear the wings off or flutter the glider or something like that. So ways to prevent that from happening would be to get training. So that would be a good way to reduce the risk, would be to get training. Okay? So precautions are things that I can do to reduce the consequences. Assuming the hazard happens, I encounter the hazard, what can I do to minimize the consequences? So if I am going to go up and do my loop, I'm not going to I'm not going to get any training, but at least I can wear a parachute so that I don't die when I take things off. So that would be something that would precautions I can take to reduce the consequences. So there's a lot of things that we do for precautions: airbags, motorcycle helmets, elbow pads and knee pads for skateboarders. They just assume they're going to fall down, so they wear the pads to reduce the consequences. It doesn't change whether or not they're going to fall down. It doesn't change the likelihood. It doesn't change the risk. It's not a prevention; it's a precaution. Okay. Now, so that's everything on the right side of the equation here. On the left side, we've got the benefit, but I want to talk about that moment arm there, because that is our values. That is what we value, and that can be based on just what we want. It can be based on what we need, what we want to accomplish. So that's the thing that, you know, a lot of people say, oh, so you get in the aircraft without an engine and you try to fly hundreds of miles, not knowing if you're going to get there. They don't value that at all. So they're not going to do this stuff. The people in this room clearly value it, and so we're doing everything we can to figure out what the precautions we can take, what preventions we can take. So that's why we're here. So,
isn't there also a benefit? I know this comes up a lot. People talk about flying, you know, instrument approaches and what their minimums are. But if you push yourself a bit with reasonable precautions, then when the unexpected happens, you're better prepared.
Yeah, but you want to do that in small increments, and if it's something that you have some ignorance about, it's something getting into a slightly new situation, that's when you have an instructor on board who do all the research you can beforehand and have an instructor.
The precaution actually reduces the prevention, doesn't it?
No, the precaution
gives you confidence that maybe you've got a backup, so you don't do the prevention as much.
That is true, and that is something that you can't let creep into your thinking. What they found is, like with airbags, fatalities when airbags first introduced went down, and then they crept right back up. Because what happened is people, oh yeah, I've had 3 drinks, but I got an airbag. And so they took more risks. So yeah, that's something that you have to be aware of, is that don't think, oh, because I have a parachute, I don't care if I break the glider. Because I'm wearing a helmet, I can ride my motorcycle 100 miles an hour. You gotta, don't think that way.
There's an official term for that. It's called moral hazard in industry jargon. If you're an actuary.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to divide values into 2 big areas. It's hopefully your rational values that brought you here. You're interested in safety. You want to be a responsible person. And these tend to be more societal values. These are the ones that we're supposed to do. Okay? And then there's the fun ones. The emotional values, our sense of adventure, our need for gratification. And these things tend to be more selfish values. So they're about me. Those other ones are about you. So, if I break 18,000 feet, if I go up to 20,000 feet on a thermal day so that I can get my badge, good for me. I meet my emotional values. My responsibility to the Soaring, the Society of Soaring Pilots, not so great, because if I get caught up there, it could affect everybody. So there's 2 sets of values that you have to keep in mind. Just because I want to do something doesn't mean I should do it. Okay, so I want to kind of go through this in a simple example. If I offer you $5 to walk across the plank that's 2 feet off the ground, there's a couple of milk crates here with the plank across the ground. So the activity is that, the benefits, $5. The hazard, what could go wrong? Well, you could fall off the plank, or the plank could break. And I used to demonstrate this. So the risk, I'm going to get to that first. The risk, yeah, I'm relatively coordinated. I think I could do it. so the risk would be relatively low. Prevention, like I say, I used to do this during this talk. You can bet I practiced. And I made sure that the plank was okay. Consequence, mostly bruised or scratched, not to anything too serious, mostly ego if I fell off. Precautions, I could put some pads around the plank, I could wear a helmet if I was really desperate. I'd move all the furniture away so there's no sharp edges to hit my head on, that kind of thing. So those are all precautions. Okay? So those terms make sense in that. Okay. Think about this. The activity is walking across the plank. Benefit $5. Hazard, risk, prevention, and precautions. If I take all those and keep them the same, but make the consequence greater, I can do that by putting these things up on a tower instead of a milk crate. So everything else is the same. What if I fall off? I'm going to die. So would my decision be the same? No, because the consequences have changed. I'm still pretty confident I can walk across the plank, but I'm going to do different things because of the consequences. So my precautions, well, first of all, prevention, I would definitely practice. Practice and practice and practice at low altitude and then bring it up. Precaution, I could wear a safety rope, so that if I did fall off, the consequence wouldn't be death, but it just might be some rope burns. Okay?
Wouldn't the risk be high, or is it because of the precaution that it reduces the risk?
Well, no, the risk would be the same. I mean, I'm still walking across the plank. So the consequence is the fact that I'm falling from a higher distance of the hazard, meaning the hazard will be what changes. Okay. We've already kind of talked about this one. I'm not going to spend much time on that. I am going to back up though here. What if I don't know how tall my boxes are there? I'm ignorant of that. I don't know. I don't understand what the risk really is. I don't understand what the consequences really could be. I don't understand how likely. And my board is wrapped in paper, so I can't really see it. I don't know if there's anything there or not. So those are all examples of ignorance of the actual conditions. So if someone was to come here in their own motor glider, go take off on a day when there's 30 knot west winds, and they've never flown in the mountains before, those are, they've flown in high winds before. So they're in conditions that they think they know, but they have no idea what the risk is. They have no idea what preventions they should be taking. They have no idea what the consequences can be. So ignorance is a huge, if you're not familiar with the conditions, not familiar with the situation, then you can't make a decision. You can't make a good decision. It's going to be a guess. And the outcome is going to rely on luck, which we'll talk about. Okay, so let's skip that one. Okay, so obstacles to good decision making. Undefined values. If it's good to think about why we're doing this, because this is pretty silly. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, what we're doing is purely for fun and ego gratification. So those are the values that drive us to do this. Those shouldn't be the values we use to make our decisions. We have responsibilities, we have families, we have things that we need to take care of in addition to our egos. So we have to make our decisions based on what we want, but also societal values, what we should be doing. Of course, since I've come up with this structured process, I think having an unstructured process is a bad thing. But I really do think if you think about things in this way, you will become more aware of your decision-making process and will probably make better decisions. I doubt you'll make worse decisions. Like I said earlier, ignorance of the hazards, risks, or consequences. And the bad thing about ignorance is most people that are ignorant of something don't know they don't know about it. So that's where you just, in something like this, Well, you come to these things and we tell you about it. Urgency. If I have to make a decision quick, I don't have time to think through all this. So the more decisions I can make ahead of time, the better. Okay? Speaking of, I'm not going to go through all these, but you can read them in your notebooks. These are some of the decisions that you can make before a flight. And I would recommend that you read through these, you answer them, and I mean, these are questions that during BFRs or flight reviews, I often ask people, what are your answers to this? Have you thought about it? So, we won't go through all those. Okay. Warnings, warning signs of poor decision making. If you're making a lot of decisions in the air that could have been made on the ground, that's a problem. If you're having undesirable or outcomes or close calls, it's like during my first 2 or 3 years of cross country, I landed out a few times. So that wasn't good. I haven't landed out since. So by changing my decision-making process, sticking to my limits, I was able to get rid of that. Luckily, I never damaged anything during any of the off-field landings. The time I damaged something was when I landed on an airport, a private one. If you're scaring yourself, or worse, if you're not scaring yourself but you're scaring others. So if other people are saying to you, you know, that was iffy, you really need to listen to that, because most people are not going to be, unless you're just a really obnoxious person, most people aren't going to be out to get you. You know, they're worrying about the safety of the sport, the safety of you, their safety if you're flying close to them. So if people are bothered enough to bring something up to you, listen to them and really consider what they're saying. One of the things that always makes a red flag go up in my mind is when I hear somebody telling a story and it ends by, I got so lucky. So, because to me, that just, I translate it in, I made bad decisions. So if the outcome depends on luck, you're not doing something right, because luck only goes so far. Okay, so decision making. Now we're going to move into improving decision making. Define and understand your values. So both ahead of time when you're on the ground and decisions you make in the air. You know, really, just by saying, is this something for me? Is there something am I doing an emotional, or am I making a rational decision? Just having the process of that can help you, I think. Plan ahead, practice using this process. One of the things that I used to love, I've made a big deal of this with the kids, and they started using it, and somewhat jokingly sometimes, but at least they were thinking about it, you know. And of course learn, which is why you're here. Self-discipline, the ability to follow through on decisions you have made. An example here. So I have made the decisions that I will obey the FARs. So, but let's say I'm doing my 1000K and I'm approaching 18,000 feet at 1,500 feet a minute, one of those typical minimum days. And if I could just climb a little bit more, I could go further, go faster, and all that. So, you know, everything in you says, yeah, go ahead. What's the worst that could happen? Well, so the emotional values say keep climbing. The rational values say, hey, if you have a mid-air or near miss while you're in Class A, you know, it could really affect the sport of soaring. In addition to killing you, if something hit you, but even just a near miss, even if you got observed doing that, it could have effects on the sport of soaring. So stick to what the decision hopefully you made the decision to obey the FARs. Stick to it. Let's say you're cross-country pilot, you've made the decision that your safety factor is 50%, meaning that you're only going to use 50% of the published glide slope of the glide ratio of the glider for your planning purposes. So you're always going to have twice as much altitude as you need to get to a certain point, and certain arrival altitude. So if you're approaching those limits, like the glider on the left there, has the decision of turning back and trying to find another thermal or landing at the first airport, or continuing on. Now, think about the thought process of that glider on the left there. There's a cloud right there in front of them. Without the safety factor, they know they could make it to the airport. What's the likelihood they're going to hit some bad sink or the winds are going to change? They don't know. They're ignorant of that, to be truthful. So they might continue on, hit some sink, and crash. They might make it to the airport. 9 out of 10 times they'll probably make it to the airport. Maybe 99 out of 100 times. You know, personally, I don't want to crash 1 out of 100 times I fly. That would not be good. So, you know, a lot of those things that are going through their head. Oh, there's a cloud. Oh, I could really make it. Safety factor. Throw that out the window. Those are all rationalizations they're doing, that their emotions are doing to try to get them to keep going. Rational values say don't risk a land out, don't risk breaking the glider. So what you should do is turn back, find a thermal, or land at your safety airport, one that you definitely have in glider ratio. Okay, things that'll get in the way of good self-discipline. Fixation on a goal. Getting those badges. Breaking records. The talk that Gordon gave yesterday, the talk that Ainer gave yesterday, both of them talked about this, about how they were very, they're doing some serious stuff, but they're not letting that fixation on those goals get in the way of their decision making. They're being cautious, and I think that was, for me, that was great to hear these really high level pilots talking about how important it is. Because you don't get to be that level of pilots by taking risks, unnecessary risks. Everything has to be thought out. Peer pressure, this is the ones our parents tell us about now. You probably tell your kids. But peer pressure isn't just we're going to go fly, you should come fly with us, we're not going to worry about land out areas, we don't need no stinking airports. That's just overt peer pressure. Not a lot of people do that. But if there's a gaggle of gliders ahead of you, and you're already approaching not being able to get back to the airport with your safety factors, there's this pressure to go join the herd. And I call that, covert peer pressure. Nobody's really pressuring you, but you feel the need to go do what everybody else is doing. You have no idea what those people's values are. You have no idea what those people's limits are, what they're making their decisions based on. If you're in one of our gliders doing this versus in your own glider or club glider, that's a big difference. We want you to fly airport to airport. If you're flying your own glider and you're willing to risk landing out in the field, that's fine. Don't do it in like a BASA glider or one of our gliders, or most airports or most glider ports wouldn't want you to land out in the gliders. And then again, complacency. If somebody said, yeah, I've done this before where I was under glide slope, but there was a cloud ahead of me, and I could probably make that airport, and I tried it, and it worked. And I tried it, and it worked. And I tried it, and it worked. I'll try it one more time. Now, that's complacency if they've already made the decision to do something and then they're not doing it. Now, if as you get better and better, and you find that you're arriving at your altitude, at your airports really high all the time, that you're actually achieving your glide ratio as opposed to being under it, then it's time to make a conscious decision to decrease your safety margins. But it should be made on the ground while you're planning a flight, not in the air so that you can continue a flight. You know, it's like, oh, I can't make it with my 50% safety factor. I'm gonna go to a 25% safety factor. Bad. That's not the way you should do it. You should do it based on, you know, on data. I'm always getting there high now because I've gotten better at working lift, at flying the glider. It's time to decrease the safety margin a little bit. That's a much different thing than doing it in the air. Okay. So, if you're changing decisions that you made in the air, you're changing decisions you made on the ground, big warning sign. If you hear that little voice in you in your head, trying to tell you why it's okay to break that rule, just tell it to shut up. So, obviously, if you're violating rules, those rules are there for a reason, then you've probably got a problem. Okay, ways to improve your self-discipline. Accept your current situation and limits. Fly the situation you are in, not the one you want to be in. You want to be in a position to finish your 1,000K, but you're 1,000 feet above the ground and barely have an airport made. Fly that situation, not the one you want to be in. So you really just have to accept that. Critique yourself after each flight. I mean, most people, if they make a bad landing, they think about it, right? Why did that happen? How did that, why did I bounce? Why did I touch down so hard? Whatever. Do the same thing with your judgment process. So think about times during the flight that you may have stretched things. Think about times that you did make the right decision, and really strive for 100% compliance on your self-discipline. And by that, and one of the things I do want to keep in mind here is that you can change your decisions. Just do it in a rational way, not an emotional way. Okay? So, in summary, poor judgment increases your chance of getting into a stressful situation, which will further decrease your judgment because you're having to make decisions quickly. So the more planning, the better. Situational awareness can be improved through planning and proficiency. If you haven't flown all summer, all winter, the first flight of the summer should not be a cross-country flight. You should go out and get comfortable with the glider. Decision making. Know your values, practice and use a structured approach, and make all safety-related decisions have to be based on rational values. Sorry about that. And then strive for 100% compliance on self-discipline. Reinforce good judgment. And I think this is key, especially for the instructors that may be here, or people who are thinking about becoming instructors, or I think all pilots should take just as much satisfaction from making a good decision as they do from any other thing they do. I consider piloting, a pilot consists of, to be a pilot, there's 3 areas you have to be good at. Decision, judgment, flying, and knowledge. And if you're relying on your flying skills to overcome your lack of judgment and your ignorance, it's only going to last so long. You wouldn't need to have all 3 of those. So be just as proud of your judgment as you are of anything else you do while flying, and compliment others on their good judgment. This is something that we can really do to reinforce this attitude of making good decisions and sticking to them. Instead of, don't idolize the guy that squeaks it in after a long flight. Compliment the guy who says, I probably could have made it, but I decided to take the safe option and land at this airport and get a short arrow to retrieve instead of trying to stretch it. That's the better pilot. Because the other one, the one who just squeaks it in, they're relying on luck. A little bit of a headwind, a little bit of sink, could have got him in trouble. The person who flies within their limits, that's the one those are the ones we want to encourage. Not the risk takers who are going to break gliders and give us a bad name. Okay? Any questions on that? I know this is kind of a dry talk, so not a great. No?
And it's not really a question, but one of the lessons I learned from one of my early instructors, which to this day, I have to keep reminding myself is, let's say I have a limit, like arrive with 1,000 feet. If I arrive with 700 feet, it's really tempting to ignore the fact that I just busted my limit. And if I don't punish myself emotionally for busting that limit, if I just say, great, I made the airport.
Yeah, that's if you say, see, I didn't need that, then that's complacency building up. If you critique yourself after each flight and say, hey, I didn't try to get back early enough, then that's just like critiquing a bad landing or critiquing anything else. And that's the process that makes you a safe pilot. Just surviving is not a good enough criteria for a good flight.
Some of these things that you got up here, I've been thinking about for months or years, of trying to kind of codify and put into understanding better. Which one of them has to do with the what you call that rationalization, which is the inner voice. Okay, because everywhere we go, whatever we do, especially in flying, you have like an inner voice that it could be your own voice, or it could be the voice of the instructor that you had. It could be the voice of anybody that you saw at a seminar or something like that. So these things pop into your head, and the question is, what do you do when? I mean, getting deeper into it, it's like, why would that particular voice be coming into your mind at that particular time? Because it just happens to fit the situation, or it's a warning or something like that. So that's an interesting concept. The other is when these voices come in, what do you do when the voice does come into your head, or when you do realize something that connects with your training in the past or something? Do you acknowledge it? Do you ignore it? Do you follow it? Do you debate with it? Do you have an argument with it? What do you do?
Yeah.
And then there's, each person's individual is different in that some may not have that voice. And then you got to wonder, like, what's going on there, and what kind of decisions or poor judgment and poor decision making are they making because they don't have that, these voices coming in. And I'm not saying voices in a negative kind of way, I'm just saying these.
What are these voices trying to do? No,
Go have fun.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, because these things come from all your experiences, from your instructors talking to you. So as an instructor, I know that I choose my words very carefully when working with a student, because I know that might come back to either help them, or that, oh, well, he said, no, I'm gonna make sure I choose my words correctly so that when somebody does get in a pinch, and they go rely on what I said verbally, that it's something that will help them, and not be something that, well, I did what he said, but look what happened, so, but I'm concerned about people in aviation all over the place, and potentially everywhere, in other walks of life, where they don't have this internal kind of conscience, or they don't have this internal,
Judgment.
yeah, well, it's just kind of a force that tells you when you get into a point. It's like the old cartoon where there's a devil and an angel on
It's
one
the
shoulder.
internal dialogue.
Yeah.
It needs to be there, but you need to have you need to recognize it, and not just go, okay, devil, sure. Because the devil, that's your ego. That's the rational, the selfish stuff.
Mhm.
The little angel is the rational stuff.
Yeah.
And you've got to have that dialogue. You got to understand where the voices are coming from.
And your own personal values and stuff will kind of affect which ones actually come into your consciousness. If I don't know, it's a very deep, interesting subject that could be explored quite a bit. But if somebody has, let's just say somebody's ego is such that they don't even let these other voices in. It's like I'm not even going to allow them into my consciousness, because they don't. My voice is much more important than any other voice anybody could give to me. So they won't even have any series of things questioning them, or so.
And as instructors, as an instructor myself, those are the ones that I won't let fly our gliders. Because it does come out. You see that anything you bring up with them, they rationalize away. And those are the ones that scare me the most. If I have a student who comes in, or a renter who comes in and says, I have 2,000 hours, but I've never flown here before, so show me everything you got, because I'm ignorant. They're always great pilots. If I have the guy who comes in and says, I have 2,000 hours, just check me out so I can go fly, that one always scares me to death. So, because it's just that difference in attitude of, I'm still learning, or I know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they do know everything, but usually,
There's always something to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
so.
always.
Okay. Is that it? Okay, so, gonna go fly now. Tonight, around 6:30, Kempton's gonna be talking about clouds. It's gonna be after the intense ones yesterday. It's gonna be a nice, lighter, pizza-oriented talk. That should be over relatively early, 8 o'clock or so. Tomorrow, so I talked earlier about maybe changing some subjects. Anybody have any strong feelings on that, one way? Thermals? Or should we just stick to the agenda?
Tomorrow's supposed to, I think, be warmer than today, what I saw
It's supposed to,
yesterday,
yeah, it's
so
supposed to
it
warm
might
a
be,
little bit.
thermals might be a good subject.
Yeah, it might be.
Do you wanna talk
about what the flying appears to be?
Okay. Okay, so maybe I'll put in thermaling tomorrow morning. I think, I've already forgotten what it was. Forecasting wave, I think, was one of them tomorrow.
Yeah. That'll be easy.
You were gonna do
Maybe
sounding.
you should change that.
Sorry.
Forecasting wave before you sign up for wave kit.
Yeah.
Interpreting soundings and predicting wave.
Yeah, so actually, I'll probably still do interpreting soundings. I think that's a really important one. And then maybe I'll do thermaling. And then we'll put predicting wave later. Okay. And then the one, just to mention it now, the one on Tuesday, the weather one, I debated about putting that one in there. That is like an overview of the weather, from the atmosphere all the way to doing predictions. And so either bring some coffee or something if you want to sit on that one. It's going to be an intense one.
Since you're putting off predicting wave conditions, let me just ask you, if, in using your predictive techniques, is there any prediction that there will be wave before the end of wave? No.
It'll be the day
Well,
after we go home.
this is a conundrum, because we want you to be wrong in your predictions because we want wave
Yes.
to show up. But then again, what good would your predictive tools be?
Right.
Right.
Right. And how can we ever
which
trust
is-
him?
Okay, so we'll do this. I'll save the predicting wave for the last day.
Oh
and,
no, you
and if we have wave before that, I won't give the talk.
That works.